In this lecture, we are going to be installing WordPress. As I mentioned in the previous lecture, I will be using local. If you're following along with me, we can walk through the installation process together. I have the app opened on my computer. Your copy of the program may look slightly different than mine. I've already created a couple of projects with local. We can create a new site by clicking on the plus button at the bottom left corner. Almost immediately, we will be asked to give our site a name. For this course, I'm going to set the name to Udemy. Below the input, there are additional advanced options. I don't recommend modifying these settings unless you know what you're doing. It's unnecessary to alter these options. Let's continue to the next step. Afterward, we can start configuring our environment. Like I said before, WordPress needs additional software to be fully functional. Specifically, it's going to need 3 programs. Let's go through them one by one. I'm going to select the Custom option. According to Local, it's going to install 3 programs. Local will install PHP, a web server, and a database. The first program is called PHP. PHP is a programming language for the web. In general, programming languages are designed for giving instructions to a machine to perform actions. For example, we can tell a machine to send an email, create a user, or generate a page. There are dozens of programming languages available, so why PHP? WordPress is written with PHP. If our goal is to modify or extend WordPress, we must learn PHP. We can't use a different language. Luckily, PHP is a very popular programming language. In fact, 78% of sites are powered by this language. Almost 8 out of 10 websites are using PHP. There's no shortage of information on PHP development. It's considered beginner-friendly. I think it's a great language to learn. The second program is a web server. Computers need to be configured to deliver files to the browser. The job of a web server is to send files from the server to the browser. If the browser needs an image, the server will send an image. If the browser needs an HTML file, the server sends back an HTML file. So on and so forth. Without a web server, our computers won't be able to send the images to the browser. The responsibility of a web server is to expose files via an HTTP URL. In a future lecture, we will dive into the mechanics of a web server. This lecture is meant to give a high-level overview of the programs we're installing. The last program is a database. Databases are what you imagine they are. They are programs for storing information. We can store blog posts, users, and settings for a WordPress site. It's as simple as that. Local is going to ask us to configure these programs. For PHP, we can select a version. One of the benefits of using WordPress is its backward compatibility. We can install WordPress on older versions of PHP, such as version 5. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a page of minimum requirements for WordPress. The WordPress team offers recommendations of the minimum versions of each software. For PHP, it's recommended to install version 7 or higher. While it's not against the rules to use an older version of PHP, your site becomes vulnerable to attacks. Older versions of PHP are not maintained. They have security flaws and bugs. You should always be working with the latest version of PHP, which is version 8. Back to the installer, let's select version 8. If there's a higher version than the version I've selected, feel free to select it. PHP ships new versions every year. The next option on this list is the web server. There are 2 options called Apache and Nginx. If you were to search online, there are dozens of debates surrounding these programs. Some users prefer Apache, others prefer Nginx. Regardless, they're both compatible with WordPress. For this course, we're going to be using Nginx. If you have experience with a specific web server, feel free to select it. It will not impact the theme and plugin we'll be building for this course. The last option is the database. WordPress supports 2 databases called MySQL and MariaDB. Initially, WordPress had sole support for MySQL. A couple of years ago, the developers of MySQL decided to create a new database called MariaDB. They didn't like the direction MySQL was heading. In a way, you can think of MariaDB as an alternative version of MySQL. Since that's the case, WordPress is compatible with MariaDB. For this course, it's not going to matter which database we use. There are differences, but these differences will not be explored in this course. Database management is considered a separate job. In my preference, I like working with MariaDB, so I'll select it. Feel free to choose MySQL. Let's continue to the next step. The final step will ask us to create a WordPress user. This user will be defined as an administrator of our site. We can configure the credentials for this account. I'm going to input basic login details. Keep in mind that our server is only accessible to us. The outside world does not have access to our site. Therefore, our site being hacked is not going to be an issue. After creating an account, click Add Site. After doing so, Local will begin installing these programs. This process may take a couple of minutes. Be patient. After installation, we'll be presented with an overview of our site. There are various options at our disposal for modifying the current environment. Before reviewing these options, let's test if our site is working. By default, Local should have turned your server on. If not, you can enable your server by clicking on the Start button at the top right corner. After doing so, we can click on the Open Site button. A new tab will be opened in our browser. Without writing a single line of code, we were able to get WordPress up and running. Let's continue our discussion of the configuration in the next lecture.